Hi, Penny.
Okay.
How you doing?
I
No.
figured out the stupid thing I did with my camera last week.
Yeah, what was it?
Oh, David was right. There's a little slider thing on the top that shuts the camera off, and I had no idea it was there.
Yeah, mine's the
Or
same way.
it's
It's got a little pop-up thing.
Oh, no, this is very discreet. And I wouldn't have looked for it except for he said, "Why don't you check that?" And I said, "Okay, check what?" And I looked and it was slid over, and I don't know how that happened. Okay, the dog
could
has
be,
to be.
it could be it came from when you bought it, it came that way. I mean, it
Well,
came.
no, yeah, it was working. I think it just got accidentally slid over, and I didn't even know it was there. So
It's probably
anyway,
to keep you from being on video if you don't want to be.
yeah, true. I expect that's the case. Yes.
Hey, Mitch.
Ray is over here in his eating chair.
Oh, happy birthday, Ray.
Oh, hey, thanks. Secret's out, huh?
Well, that was all over Facebook.
Yeah,
Yeah, I told Emily, would you be discreet?
That's discreet for her. It was only what, 6 or 7 pictures instead of 20 or 30.
And only among her 600 or 700 closest friends.
Oh yeah, right.
So we have lectures 23 to 28 or something.
23 to 25. We had 23 last week. Tonight is
Okay.
24 and next week's 25.
Okay.
He was afraid there was going to be 3 lectures tonight.
Oh, no. Maybe that's why I got a message from Diane. She wasn't coming. I hope it didn't scare her that way.
Yeah.
No, I didn't see. It was just easier to send it out that way. That's all. How you doing, dog?
Oh, I don't know. She always knows. I don't know how she does because the computer doesn't say anything, but when I start talking, I guess, to a computer, it's like a 2-year-old. She has to be here, right in my lap.
Photobomb you.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably because you talk to your daughters and maybe she wants to hear from them.
Yes. Oh, when she hears their voices, runs right. She'll be in another room and she'll come over. This time she was just sleeping at my feet and decided to, "Can you sit down? Can you sit down? Sit."
Why?
Why? Sit. Come on, sit. Or go away. I love you. Go away.
No, Anne's got a Labradoodle and they'll get in your lap.
Well, yes, that's not going to happen. Kaylee's a little big for that.
So is Hugo. Hugo's the same size.
Oh, I see. Okay. No, when she was a puppy, she wanted to do that and we greatly discouraged her. So she stopped trying,
Oh,
but she will sleep right on my feet, which when it's cold, is actually rather nice.
oh. Well, Hugo will lay on the couch next to Anne when she's watching TV.
Okay. They do make a nice blanket.
Yeah. He's gotten a little calmer over time.
Yeah, so is Kaylee. I mean, she's 8.5. She'll be 9 in January. So,
Yeah.
it's she doesn't really play ball anymore. I mean,
Oh.
she'll play very, like toss the ball once, twice, and up until the time she was about 3 or 4, it was all the time.
Oh, they'll sure. Hi, Carol.
Hello there, Mitch, and hello there, Penny, and hello
Hello.
for Helen. Hello.
Hi, Helen.
So,
And Dale is
Hi.
joining us. Mary is entertaining our granddaughter at the moment, so she'll join us later. And Diane Hansen sent her regrets.
Somebody got a haircut, Mitch.
I've had it for a while. I
Yeah.
guess I got it since you saw me.
That must be.
Yeah. Although I think Mary gave me a haircut before they had the final service because she wanted me looking respectable.
Uh-huh. I wonder why. How was your
That's
trip to Arizona? How was
that's
Arizona?
the burden of a clergy spouse.
How was Arizona?
Oh, it's great.
Great.
Yeah, they had 90-degree days before we got there, and then it went down into the mid 80s,
Oh,
and
that's
it was
tolerable.
light breeze. I mean, the skies were clear blue.
Mhm.
Couldn't ask for a nicer day, and
There you
the
go.
wedding was very nice. And
Good.
yeah, it was a great. Actually, I was concerned because we were changing planes in Dallas, but there was no trouble there.
Uh-huh.
And our bags went to the same place that we did.
Yeah,
Sometimes your bags take a more interesting trip than you do.
you're right.
So, how are you, David?
Good, how are you?
Good. How's the weather there?
Good, good. About 55, 60 degrees. Supposed to be 70 tomorrow,
Oh,
next 2 days, so, yeah.
Warmer than we are at the coast here.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
it's cold.
Oh, yeah, no, the water's getting cold down there probably now, starting.
Yeah, yeah. I brought I have a very large hibiscus plant tree.
Oh, yeah,
Brought it in today because last night it got into the low 40s.
You know,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I put a couple in the garage the other night because it was getting into like low 40s.
I was gonna say Rochester will be having snow any day here.
I don't know, last year we were getting corn on the cob at the market around the corner until November.
Oh,
I mean, it was weird.
well, that's climate change for you.
Yeah. I mean, I have a yellow rose sitting in the kitchen counter that I cut from the garden 2 days ago.
Yeah, our tomatoes are actually are still functioning.
Ours is
Yeah.
coming through terrifically, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The market around the corner, we got like fresh string beans, corn, and tomatoes just the other day.
So,
That's good. We're lucky right now.
okay. You'll excuse me for a moment. I'm gonna log on my wife.
Hey, your camera's working, Penny. That's good.
Yes, thank you. Your little suggestion was exactly what the problem was. I didn't even know the thing existed.
Yeah, I saw they started putting that on new computers. I was looking in the last 6 months, and it's a nice option in the sense that hackers cannot open that switch. Like I hear people are talking about how the computer's on, all of a sudden somebody starts talking to somebody because hackers get into the computer. Well,
Oh,
they can control your electronic computer, your camera on the inside, but even if they turn it on, if that's closed, they can't see anything. So it's kind of nice. Maybe that's why they put it in.
I guess, but on this particular, because it's a fairly small laptop, it's
Yeah.
very discreet. I mean, I didn't even notice it was there because you had to go kind of hunt for it. It looks like it's part of the trim.
Yeah.
So now that I know it's there, I can turn it on and off.
Yeah, you don't
Whatever.
You don't have to
It's
put.
not like I have the camera on all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you'll have to pretend that bookcase is my wife, picture my wife. So, so like I said, she's entertaining our granddaughter at the moment. So,
Ah,
yeah, she's a costume apprentice at the Goodspeed, and they get Mondays off because there's no show.
oh,
Oh, okay.
Okay, so tonight, this is the second to the last lecture by Professor Cohen on the Hebrew Bible, and then we'll start on the second part of the course. So this will be, again, the Hebrew Bible and Christianity, and this was some of the things he'll be talking about. He'll be going into in much greater depth in the second part of the course. So this will give you a sort of an appetizer, I guess is the best way to describe it, for the next half. So, and then next week we have his concluding thoughts and remarks, and then we start at it again. So any questions? I will send out the notes for the second half of the course are available on the St. Luke website.
oh, okay.
And let's see, maybe what I'll do is I'll share the screen. Let's see. No, we don't want that. There we go. So everybody should see the St. Luke website here.
Yeah.
And if you go to news and events,
Oh, there you go. Place notes.
yeah, and so you've got the schedule. The second one from the bottom is from the Hebrew Bible to Judaism. And if you click on that, and there should be.
Oh,
So that this is the second piece we'll be doing. Again, any of the you've got the JSP and any other additional readings I will be sending to you.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Mitch. Appreciate that.
Yeah. They're in the public domain, so don't worry about that. I don't think I'm violating the copyright. By now, you know, Justin Martyr from the 2nd century is well within the public domain. I don't know if anybody noticed, that's one reason that if you get like a free Bible, it's the King James version. Because the King James is in the public domain.
And the others aren't.
No, they aren't actually. Well, like the ones that were published in the 19th century are, but like the New Revised Standard Version is not. That is actually copyrighted by the National Council of Churches. Because what you're because what you're dealing with, I mean, if you want to look at it from the intellectual property standpoint, is the translation is what's copyrighted. So
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
yeah. So typically the more recent Bibles, like the New International Version, Jerusalem Bible, all those are typically copyrighted. So if there are no questions, I'm going to be muting folks, and then we'll proceed. So there's that. Share screen, share sound. How come I'm not seeing what I want?
So here I'm trying to squeeze enormous amounts of material into each of these sessions. We talk about the Hebrew Bible and Judaism. I didn't quite get through all my notes, but never look back, always look ahead. So today we're going to talk about Christianity, another impossibly large topic to cover in 45 or 50 minutes. Even though I talk quickly, it's not fast enough. But all right, well, we'll do what we can do. So, we're talking about Christianity today. So here I've given you on the lecture notes, you have a bunch of dates. You don't need to memorize all these dates, but just try to give you a sense of where we are in the story. So we need a little bit of basic chronology. So in the 30s, we think is the career of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, exact dates we don't have, but that's...
Sorry, there's been a technical glitch. Let's try this again. There we are.
So here I'm trying to squeeze enormous amounts of material into each of these sessions. We talk about the Hebrew Bible and Judaism. I didn't quite get through all my notes, but never look back, always look ahead. So today we're going to talk about Christianity, another impossibly large topic to cover in 45 or 50 minutes. Even though I talk quickly, it's not fast enough. But all right, well, we'll do what we can do. So, we're talking about Christianity today. So here I've given you on the lecture notes, you have a bunch of dates. You don't need to memorize all these dates, but just try to give you a sense of where we are in the story. So we need a little bit of basic chronology. So in the 30s, we think is the career of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, exact dates we don't have, but that's typically what we think. In the 30s CE in Roman Palestina, right? In Roman Galilee and Roman Judea. Then we have the letters of Paul. Paul never met Jesus. Paul thinks of himself as a disciple, but he'd actually never met the master, right? Paul himself is the author of our first documents that we would come to call Christian, or the beginnings of Christian literature is Paul, not the Gospels, Paul. Paul is active in the 50s CE. There are 13 letters attributed to Paul in the New Testament. Of those, 7 of those 13, modern scholars are unanimous in agreement that these are genuine letters of Paul. I've given you the names of them, should you be interested, and 6 others we can argue about. Anyway, these are Paul. We'll come back to Paul a little later today, briefly, I hope. 70, the temple is destroyed. That is a date you need to know, right? And that is a date you do know. 70, the temple is destroyed by the Romans. An important date for Jews, an important date for Christians, an important date for the development of both of these religious systems. After 70, we have the Gospels. Well, the Gospel of Mark might be before 70. Depends on how you interpret Mark 13. Doesn't matter for our purposes here. It's around 70. It's around the destruction of the temple. Mark, Gospel, and Matthew, Luke, John are the following decades of the first century CE. So the Gospel stories were written, we think, by people who never actually saw Jesus directly. We think the Gospels are written by people who are collecting traditions, stories, things they've heard, sayings, reports, and so on, and then creating a literary artifact, which we call a gospel. So there are 4 of them in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So I've given you the usually accepted dates for these. The last book in the New Testament, in the 90s is the book of Revelation, which hopefully I'll mention a little bit later today. Around 100 or so, we start to get books produced by Christians, as we might want to call them, which are not found in the New Testament. We're in this transition zone of New Testament books to non-New Testament books. So around 100 or so, we can already see books that are being created that are no longer part of the New Testament. They're outside the New Testament. So I give you some examples here. Epistle to the Corinthians by Clement of Rome, simply usually called First Clement, and something called the Didache. 112 CE, we have clear evidence that the Romans have noticed these Christians. And by this point, the Romans clearly think that Jews and Christians are not the same. By this point, the Romans clearly understand that the Jews are Jews and Christians are Christians, and we don't know what to do with these Christians. Right? That's the subject of an important letter from the Roman governor of Bithynia named Pliny the Younger to the Emperor Trajan. Around the year 120, we have the attestation of the word Christianity. Right, what am I doing here, class? I'm showing you how we're growing, right? You can clearly see the emergence of a separate thing called Christianity in these decades, as you can see by these markers that I'm giving you. So circa 120, we had the appearance of the word Christianity for the first time in a book that we call a Christian book, Ignatius of Antioch. Circa 130, we have perhaps our first sustained anti-Jewish book. First sustained anti-Jewish Christian book, and that's the letter to Barnabas, or the epistle of Barnabas. Barnabas was a travel companion of Paul. This is, we all agree, not written by that Barnabas. It's written by somebody else going under the name of Barnabas. Whatever. The point of that book, in brief, is that we Christians understand the Hebrew Bible correctly, and you Jews don't. That's the thesis in miniature of the Epistle of Barnabas, and that appears in much greater length, much greater detail in the work of Justin Martyr, Dialogue with Trypho the Jew, written a generation later, which is a centerpiece of my course CB23, talking about Jews and Christians read the Bible. Barnabas is short, cryptic. Justin Martyr is long and boring. Ooh, sorry, what I said. Justin Martyr is long and rich. That's what I meant to say. Dialogue with Trypho. Around 160 CE, we have an important figure in early Christianity named Marcion. sometimes pronounced Martian, but that doesn't sound quite right. So we say Marcion, around 160 in Rome, who has the idea that the God of Christians, the God who sent Christ into the world, is not the same God as the God who appears in the Hebrew Bible. Because the God who appears in the Hebrew Bible is bad, mean, angry, quarrelsome, warrior, punishment, bad. Whereas the God of the New Testament is all sweetness and light, love. That's Marcion. Now, the fact that he overlooks many passages in each of these testaments to prove this thesis is not my point at the moment. Simply that Marcion is trying hard to more or less get rid of the Old Testament and represents an important strand in Christian thought which does not go away from that day to this. Right? And that was discussed very nicely in that survey article by Mr. Piper, right? That this is a strand of Christian thought. We Christians don't need the Hebrew Bible. We don't want the Hebrew Bible. We want to get rid of the Hebrew Bible. The Marcion is pronounced to be a heretic by later Christians of later centuries. So Christians to this day have a sort of ambiguous or ambivalent relationship with the Hebrew Bible. Parts of it we love, and parts of it we're not sure what to do with. That will endure. But Marcion is trying to cut the knot. Get rid of it. We don't need it. We don't want it. That's the God of anger, war, punishment. We want the God of love. That's Marcion. By the time you get to the last decades of the 2nd century CE, you start to see the emergence of a Bible, a book, a collection of books, right, that parallels, supplements, and ultimately supplants the Hebrew Bible, namely the emergence of what we call the New Testament. When do we see the Gospels themselves may have begun to be written a century earlier, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but they don't emerge as a collection, as an authoritative book or an anthology of books until the last decades CE. So, for example, Justin Martyr, writing in the year 160, does not yet have a Bible. He has a Bible. It's what we call the Hebrew Bible. That's the only Bible he has. By the time we get to the last decades of the 2nd century, there is emerging a Christian Bible with 4 Gospels, the same 4 that we have, and a collection of letters of Paul. The document is taking shape. The New Testament, as we have it, does not fully take shape until the 4th century CE, but the process, you can see, is well underway by the end of the 2nd century CE, and most modern scholars argue what impelled Christians to create a New Testament is to rebut Marcion. Namely, these are the authoritative Christian books, and these Christian books prove that we Christians know and revere the Old Testament. All right, that's a different discussion some other time. I want to remind you around the year 200, around the same time that Christians have begun to get their act together and produce a New Testament, is around the same time that our sages in Roman Palestina have produced a Mishnah. Interesting. Come back to that too. Okay, that's a brief survey of names, dates, and the sense of the arc, right? The trajectory of where we're going. Christianity begins as something Jewish and winds up as something completely, not completely, as something different, something separate, something distinct. Okay, that would be modern Bible scholars. As usual, they don't believe what they read, right? You know, there was this Hermeneutics of Suspicion. Remember that from our very first class or second class? So at least they're fair. They apply both the Old Testament and the New Testament. So traditionalists are offended on all sides, right? So at least they're fair or consistent. Thank you for that. Okay, and similarly for traditionalists, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, in fact, are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and they, in fact, are disciples or members of the entourage of Jesus. Right, but modern Bible scholars don't believe that. Yes, sir. How do scholars know that's the Gospels? If I can tell you a dirty secret, the answer is they don't. Okay? The key date would be 70 CE, i.e. all 4 Gospels, at least I think so, maybe Mark you can argue, all 4 Gospels clearly, I think, refer to the destruction of the temple in 70. So that puts you after 70 CE. So then you have to start to figure out, well, who quotes the Gospels and knows the Gospels, and we sort of figure out the relative chronology. The absolute chronology we don't have, but it seems that Matthew and Luke are after Mark, and it seems that John is the latest of all. So give me some dates. 80s. Perfect. That's why the numbers are a little vague, right? Because we don't have that chronology. I believe that is, I've accurately summarized the argument, the analysis. But we don't have firm evidence for specific dating. It works. So now we have some sense of chronology and some sense of structure or the Christian trajectory. Let's go take a look. So Christianity, we all agree, begins as a kind of Judaism. Jesus, after all, was a Jew, i.e. he venerated the God whose temple is in Jerusalem. He is a member of the ethnos, the people of the Judeans, right? He, not only Jesus himself, but all of his followers, all the crowds whom he attracts, all the people upon whom he does miraculous healings. Footnote, except two. All of them are members of the Jewish polis, the Jewish ethnos, right, living in Judea. But we also understand that somehow this thing, Christianity, if I can use that term as simply as a convenient label, right, becomes over time something different. Well, that's interesting. That's a very interesting story. So let's just pursue this. Again, we're focused on the Hebrew Bible as our focal point. So the Jewish foundations of Christianity are evident, i.e. or reformulated. That Christianity is a kind of Judaism is very evident. Christians believe in the one God, creator of heaven and earth. That same God who in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 is busy creating heaven and earth, or when in the beginning God created heaven and earth. Well, that's the God Christians believe in. So you ask, do Jews and Christians believe in the same God? The answer is yes, the God of the Hebrew Bible. That is the one God. Christians also loudly affirm we believe in the one God. There are no other gods. Polytheism is wrong. Paganism is false. There is only one God, and that's the one God who created heaven and earth, the God of the Hebrew Bible. That is our God, Christians say very loudly in antiquity. And if you object, how do Christians believe in one God when they have a Trinity? Good question. Not discuss that right now. But it's the one God. Similarly, Christians, like Jews, affirm that the God of the Hebrew Bible is a God of justice, i.e., God exercises providential concern for the affairs of humans in this world, right? Divine providence. God is the God of history. God is in charge of things. God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. And here's an interesting point. Christians, like Jews, accept the idea that God rewards and punishes not just in this world, but also, or perhaps better, primarily in the next world, with what we might loosely call heaven and hell, reward and punishment in the hereafter, Garden of Eden, resurrection, a final judgment, Messiah, all of that complex of beliefs, which may I remind you, is barely to be found in the Hebrew Bible, but which characterizes post-biblical Judaism or non-biblical Judaism. That complex is to be found, again, mutatis mutandis, lots of things are changing. If you don't know mutatis mutandis, I'll use that phrase again on Friday, just wait. Mutatis mutandis, right? Christians also have the same thing. Namely, this complex of how God rewards and punishes is postponed to the alternative reality of the afterlife or the end of time. Similarly, Christians inherit from the Hebrew Bible, or follow the Hebrew Bible, and have a notion of a covenantal relationship with God. There are all those Gentiles out there. Then there is we, us, who stand in a special relationship with God. Right? We talked about the covenant, which appears from time to time in the Hebrew Bible. Well, who is that covenanted people of God? Who is the Israel of God, to use the phrase from Paul? Who is the Israel of God? Well, Jews say it's us. And Christians will say in response, no, it's not you, or maybe they might say, it was once you, but in any case, it's not you anymore, it's us. Meaning us Christians, because you Jews fumbled. You had the football, but you dropped it. And we Christians picked it up and ran with it. So we are the new covenantal people of God. Or if you want, the chosen people of God. Yes, Christians say that about themselves. I'll show you text if you don't believe me, right? It's right there. Justin the Martyr has a whole passage on it, and so does Barnabas. Anyway, like Jews, Christians affirm the truth and divine origin of the Hebrew Bible. Class, how do Christians know that Jesus Christ is truly God, Son of God, Messiah? How do Christians know that? Exactly. I'll start quoting you passages right and left from the Hebrew Bible that prove that Jesus Christ is God, Son of God, Messiah, Redeemer, suffering servant, sits at the right hand of the Father, sits in glory, etc., etc., etc. All of that, it's right there. It's right in front of you in the Hebrew Bible. Take that away, you Christians will lose a very important element of their thinking, namely to prove, to have divine proof for these Christian truths. Now, needless to say, Jews will dispute Christians and the interpretation of all of these passages. I've already given you tastes of that from time to time here in this course, pointing out that Christians say this, and Jews know that the Christians are wrong. Okay, fine, so prove is perhaps the wrong word, but from a Christian point of view, it is a proof. We Christians believe in the truth of the Hebrew Bible, and the Hebrew Bible in turn proves the truth of Christianity. That's one reason why Christians cannot accept Marcion, because if you throw away or get rid of the Old Testament, then you've lost something. You've lost something very important from a Christian perspective, or at least from a non-Marcionite Christian perspective. Christians who show their love and veneration for the Hebrew Bible, as Jews do, read it regularly in services. Remember, we discussed on Monday that there's a lectionary cycle in Judaism. Jews read the entire Torah, not the whole Bible, but the entire Torah is read in a cycle in synagogue. Similarly, there are regular readings from the Hebrew Bible in church as part of services, and I gave you two very interesting little articles to read about that. The history of that is disputed, as all these things are. We don't know exactly how old it is, but it seems to inherit from the Jewish idea. You read Scripture each week. Christians also regularly read Scripture as part of the Mass, part of the regular services, and that includes excerpts from the Old Testament, which are then juxtaposed with passages from the New Testament. Right, the fancy word for that is lection, or the lectionary cycle. I'm going to skip this thing about the biblical liturgical year, because I'm not sure this proves how biblical Christianity is or how biblical Christianity isn't. Right, that Sabbath turns into Sunday and Passover turns into Easter. So is that proof of biblical roots of Christianity, or is that proof that Christianity is throwing off its biblical roots? The answer is yes. So I'm going to skip that line, because after writing it, I remember thinking about it myself. Is this evidence? What does this prove? You could argue that one either way. I'm going to skip that line. Psalms. Christians love the Psalms. Jews love the Psalms. Right? It's a very prominent part of the Jewish prayer book, and it's a very prominent part of the Christian prayers, including church readings, correct? You read reading lectionary cycle from the Psalms too. Right. Okay. So, Christians then, you see, share a world of discourse and a world of truth claims with Jews. Here's the most interesting category. Christians possess Hebrew books, or what we customarily call Jewish books. Not just the Hebrew Bible. I'm trying not to call it the Jewish Bible, but we'll come back to that, I hope. The Hebrew Bible is part of Christian tradition, although Christians quickly lose Hebrew. But then again, many Jews lost Hebrew also. They're reading the Bible in Greek. So they're no better off than Christians are. But the interesting thing is that Christians will inherit from ancient Jews not just the Hebrew Bible. After all, they're Jews themselves, so no surprise there. But they're also bringing a whole slew of books come along. Books that are not found in the Hebrew Bible, at least not in our Hebrew Bible. Books like the apocryphal books, or books like Philo and Josephus, just plain Jewish writers who write books. These have become part of the Christian heritage. Who preserved Philo and Josephus for us? Philo we've mentioned here a few times, right? Jewish thinker of the 1st century CE. Josephus we haven't mentioned. He's an important Jewish writer of the 1st century CE, a historian, a very important source for our knowledge of ancient Judaism, and thereby also ancient Christianity. Who preserved Philo and Josephus for us? Jews didn't. They walked away from all this Greek Jewish literature. It's Christians who preserved it, because it came along as part of the Jewish library, came along into Christianity as well. So, and then Professor Cohen adds on his footnote, then his lecture notes, and much else. So, I've proven to you, convincing you that there is a strong Jewish element. By that I mean an element that is common to both Jews and Christians. Right? Books, ideas, traditions, beliefs that are common to Jews and Christians alike, right? Confirming what I've said all along, Christianity began, and to some extent still is, a kind of Judaism. Everything I just said should be obvious and should be truisms, but alas, they need to be said out loud because people don't pay attention to this. Certainly the idea that we Christians have inherited the place of the Jews, a doctrine called Supersessionism, I'll come back to that at the end of today, that's old, that's the New Testament, right? You find it explicitly in Justin Martyr, but he's working out of ideas that are already there. Paul, we can argue about what exactly Paul means, especially in his famous last 3 chapters of the letter to the Romans, right? So, in turn, Christians take over from Jews the Jewish millennialist expectations. So Justin Martyr says that Jesus Christ will reestablish his kingdom on earth when he returns. It will be a 1,000-year kingdom. He will reign in glory in the rebuilt city of Jerusalem. That's Justin Martyr, Christian talking, right? So what had been the Jewish millennial expectations are now transferred to Christians and Christianity. Now, when exactly we get the idea that we need Jews around so that Jews will restore their kingdom and country and thereby facilitate the second coming of Christ? The 2nd century CE then is the crucial formative century. This is the century in which people who had been Jews turn into Christians, and it is the crucial century during which people who had been Jews turn into Jews. Because I'm willing to say the rabbis and rabbinic Judaism of the 2nd century is no less a reinvention, reimagination, rebranding of Judaism than Christianity is. Just it winds up in a very different place. So rabbinic Judaism emerges in the 2nd century with the Mishnah at the end. Similarly, Christian Judaism, if I can use that word, emerges in the 2nd century with the Gospels and the New Testament by the end of that century. So the 2nd century is exciting. Something important going on, right? For both people we call Jews and Christians. Then I have this little formula here. The rabbis are to the Mishnah as the Christians are to the New Testament. All right, key point. Neither rabbinic Jews nor Christians read the Hebrew Bible in an unintermediated fashion. Both of them are reading the Hebrew Bible, the text, through a certain set of lenses or perspectives. The Christian perspective can be summarized very quickly. Jesus Christ. Everything in the Hebrew Bible, it turns out, is about Jesus Christ. You didn't think so? Well, it's true. Right. Not just the prophecies, but everything somehow reflects on, or is a reference to, is illuminated by, or illuminates the life and sayings of one Jesus Christ of Nazareth. In that sense, the Christian reading is very programmatic. You know exactly where they're going, and the Christian program is clear. Similarly, the rabbis have a more complicated set of lenses that they're using. Clearly, they don't use the Jesus Christ lens. That's not one of their lenses. But the rabbis have their own things going on. They are scholastic, right? They are far more interested than Christians are in determining the law. They are inventing traditions right and left, both legal traditions and also traditions of interpretation. Again, this oral Torah begins to get expounded in the 2nd century CE. So the rabbis are reading scripture also through their own set of interpretive, fancy word, hermeneutic lenses. The result is rabbis wind up with the Hebrew Bible and the Mishnah, and then much else. Christians wind up with the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament and much else. Now, if you're going to ask me the million-dollar question, well, Professor, which of these traditions do you think is truer, is more authentic, is more genuine interpretation of the Hebrew Bible? Then I'll say, you think I'm going to answer that question? Well, you think I'm stupid and I'm going to answer that question? Okay, so all this on the one hand. I'm going to continue along here. Or maybe on Friday, if you insist, I'll come back to that question. But by the 2nd century CE, again, this formative century, is also time when we see very clear evidence from Christian texts that Christianity is no longer a Judaism. It has become something else. This, again, is a very complicated and much debated question, but I'm just going to plow on ahead here. So here I've given you 4 rubrics to talk about. By population, theology, laws of the Torah, and self-identity. These are 4 different headings under which we can see how Christianity has become something not Jewish, something different, which we might call Christianity. So, population, or makeup, the human power. Who are these people? Gentile. What does Gentile mean? Somebody born not a Jew, right? The very category of Gentile is a Jewish perspective on the world, dividing up the world into two. There are Jews, and all the other 800 billion people in the world, they're all Gentiles. Right, so it's a typical way for minority groups to look at the world, us and them, and this is something Christianity inherited from Judaism. Right, the world consists of us and them, okay, all right, anyway. But Gentiles, so Christians, amazingly enough, ethnically, their descent group, their bloodlines, they are no longer a part of the ethnic people of Israel. They are decidedly, ethnically speaking, not Jews, not Israel. And this was a self-conscious move by early Christians. This is, as is well known, the story is told in the book of Acts. Paul is an important figure in this transition, in which we might say Christians break out of the ethnic boundaries of Jews, of Judaism, to become a new non-ethnic people of God, right, in which Christians are defined themselves as no longer the old Jewish bloodline, except metaphorically, except spiritually. Christians will justify this, again, looking at Scripture, justify this. They will look especially at those passages of 2nd Isaiah, and I highlighted those here precisely for this reason, in which 2nd Isaiah talks about the light of the Lord lighting up the world. Right, how knowledge of God will become spread out, will go forth, where the Gentiles will come streaming to Jerusalem, where the Gentiles will acknowledge the truth of God. Beautiful passages in 2nd Isaiah. Well, Christians read those passages and say, yes, you see, that's us. We have fulfilled those passages. The rabbis will say in response, not yet. So the Mishnah is written by a small group of elite scholars for a small group of elite scholars. And furthermore, the Mishnah is also an extraordinarily difficult, almost impenetrable book. You have to study, in yeshiva for many years to understand what's going on, just because of the style of the book. New Testament is written in Greek, Abinitio written in Greek, all the books are written in Greek, and clearly is designed to be accessible literature. What does that mean, this contrast? I don't know, but it's interesting.
Sorry, I misspoke. I meant to say the oral Torah instead.
The oral Torah. The oral Torah is a theory, again, developed by the rabbis to explain how come we add, delete, modify the Torah right and left when we're not supposed to do that. Answer, it's okay, because it's the oral Torah. That's the rabbinic theory. Okay? The fancy word in anthropology of religion would be it's a myth. Not that it's false, but it's a sacred story by which the rabbis impose meaning on the world, or by which they reflect how the rabbis understand the world. That what we interpreters are doing is not, in fact, to throw off, to rebel, distort the text, rather is to enucleate hidden meanings from it. Christians will do the same thing, but they don't have a theory of an oral Torah. Theology. Here we find Christians doing two very interesting maneuvers that Jews are not comfortable with, or will turn out not to be comfortable with. On the one hand, Jesus is understood to be an aspect of God. That is to say, this is what I call a complementary intermediary, right? A power who intermediates between the heavenly realms and the earthly realms, who is working with God, and indeed for Christians is part of God in some mysterious way. There is God and there is Christ the Lord. Remember, Lord is the standard title for Jesus. So he is in fact that mysterious Son of Man in Daniel 7 who has a throne waiting for him next to God. He is the Logos, divine reason or divine speech or divine intellect, right, through which God created the world. That's in the Gospel of John, or the Christ hymn in the letter to the Philippians, right, in which Jesus, the human, is elevated into divine status and is understood to be a crucial aspect of God through which God, the eternal, unmovable, unmover, God, has contact with humans, has contact with the world of the finite, corporeal, corruptible world in which we live. Otherwise, how do you bridge the gap? So for Christians, we bridge that gap through the person of Christ, who is understood to be part human, part God, or more accurately for Christian theology, 100% human and 100% divine at the same time. As far as we know, by the 2nd century CE, Jews don't like this kind of theology. Right? The rabbis like the theology, there is one God, there is none else, period. And none of this intermediary stuff. You got angels running around, yeah, but that's not the same thing, right? We don't have these beings who sort of intermediate between the realm above and the realm below. We Jews don't do that anymore. Philo did that with his Logos theology. That's in the 1st century. That was in Greek, and he's a philosopher. That's very nice. But we, rabbinic Jews, don't do that anymore. We think there's one God. You ask, how does this one God who's up there in the heavens have contact down here on earth? Isn't the gap too great? Isn't the gap, how do you bridge the gap? Answer, yeah, bridge the gap. That's the answer. In other words, we don't go there. On the other side, you have Christians doing something else very interesting, which is promoting the idea that this world, the world in which we live, is under the control of hostile forces. Devil, Satan, sin. In fact, we humans are steeped in sin. That's how we come out into the world. We need divine grace. We need divine redemption to be saved from sin, evil, corruption, the evil forces, the evil powers, etc., which are all around us. And it's only through Christ somehow, right, this beacon sent us by God, we can to penetrate the darkness, that we can somehow get out, escape, or be redeemed, attain salvation. This is an idea which, of course, had been around in various Jewish circles in the early centuries, last centuries BC, 1st century CE. And this idea will take off in early Christianity, and again, the rabbis will walk away from it. The rabbis are aware there is evil forces in the world, to be sure, but they have nothing like this dualistic system, or the system that says that we humans need to be redeemed, because otherwise we are under the sway, under the power, under the control of evil forces. So at baptism, we Christians deny Satan and all his works. There's nothing like that in Judaism. It's in rabbinic Judaism. This dualism will continue to develop in early Christianity, so much so that the body, the corruptible, decaying, lust-prone body is seen as the work of the devil and Satan, the evil, right? And we Christians need to escape. We escape from the world, we escape from the body. That's where we're going with this trend in Christianity, which again, it's very hard to find that arc in Judaism, certainly in rabbinic Judaism. So, does it make this not Judaism? It makes it different. That's what it makes it. It's different. Next one, self-consciously critical approach to the laws of the Torah. Here I'm going to refer you to that very nice article, an encyclopedia article, which is available to you on the course page, if you have a Harvard ID. There's endless debate among ancient Christians, among medieval Christians, among modern Christians. Endless debate about what to do with the laws of the Hebrew Bible. Narratives or histories, remember the Christian division of the Bible into four. So the narratives, histories of the Hebrew Bible, Christians love those stories the way Jews love those stories. They're wonderful stories, the narratives. That's not a problem. Prophecies, already established, Christians love the prophecies because prophecies prove the truth of Christ. Wisdom literature, sure, we Christians like fear of the Lord. No problem. It's those laws that's a problem. What do we Christians do with the laws of the Bible, specifically the laws of the Torah? So here there are different strands, different approaches, and again, Piper gives you a nice survey of the main points. So we have at least three different standard positions. Laws are valid of the Hebrew Bible if they're confirmed by the New Testament. If somebody in the New Testament somewhere says something confirming the law in the Hebrew Bible, then clearly it is still true. Good example, and one which has contemporary relevance, is Paul in Romans chapter 1 seems to echo and to reaffirm the prohibitions of male homosexual intercourse, which is spelled out in Leviticus 18 and the parallel in Leviticus 20. So that proves, for certain Christians at least, that the prohibitions of Leviticus 18 and 20 still apply to Christians because they are confirmed by Paul. Or you might perhaps have a different spin on that and say, the laws are valid unless they have been suspended or overwritten. So, good example, Mark 7. Mark 7 seems to be a passage which says, and he declared all foods clean, which is an endlessly disputed passage, but I won't discuss that right now, which seems to say that Jesus says that Christians can eat lobster and shrimp and pork. Clearly then, therefore, if we understand that correctly, then Jesus has set aside the food laws of Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. And last but not least is a category which is much beloved of Protestants who argue that the laws are valid only if they're the moral laws, not ritual laws. What are moral laws? Love your neighbor as yourself. Honor your father and mother. You shall not steal. Lie. Murder. Not kill, murder. Shall not murder. Right, these laws are obviously eternal and are meant to be observed by all people at all times. But clearly the ritual stuff is not meant for us Christians, like circumcision or, I don't know, the eating matzah on Passover or, I don't know, what I think some more things, ritual laws. You know, what those Jews do. We don't do that. Anyway, if you take CB23 next term, you'll see that my friend Justin Martyr, right, spends a lot of time trying to grapple with the laws of the Hebrew Bible, trying to explain that some laws we Christians observe. We Christians do observe love your neighbor as yourself. That comes out of Leviticus 19, right? We Christians observe that. We Christians observe you shall honor your father and mother, right? We observe that. That's also in the Hebrew Bible. But other laws of the Hebrew Bible we don't observe. Justin Martyr will be busy trying to explain. One standard strategy the Christians come up with that Jews don't do is allegory, right, in which the laws are understood to represent moral categories. So the classic example about the food laws, this is an epistle of Barnabas, right? So when Moses says don't eat certain kinds of food, what Moses meant, of course, was you Christians should be careful to stay away from certain kinds of people. The pig represents some kind of people, a porcupine represents other kind of people, wrong kind of birds represent other kinds of people, people with negative qualities. You should stay away from them. Don't have anything to do with them. And that's how you fulfill the law, says Barnabas, right, in which legal categories are understood to represent moral categories. Christians do that among their arsenal of weapons of how to interpret the Bible, the laws of the Bible. Rabbinic Jews do not. They think the laws mean the laws. Are the rabbinic Jews literal readers of Scripture? Answer is no. Read David Stern's article in the JSB about Midrash. The rabbis are far from literal in any sense of our sense of the word literal. They're twisting scripture right and left. But at the end of the day, they accept the literal truth in the sense that if there's a law about food, it's a law about food. And it says circumcision, it means cut off your foreskin, it means cut off your foreskin. It doesn't mean excise lust. Okay, read Stern. I got 2 minutes left. Self-identity. Perhaps the most important quality of all is self-consciousness or self-identity. The rabbis, for all of their twists and turns and for all of their re-evaluation of Scripture and reinterpretation of Scripture and adding to Scripture and deleting from Scripture and modifying Scripture, while they do all those things, the vehicle of the oral Torah allows them to say, honestly, I don't think they were kidding, honestly, that we are they are us. We are doing exactly what Moses wanted us to do. We've changed nothing, we've done nothing. In our own self-consciousness, we imagine that what we are doing is that which God intended all along. Or, put it differently, we, the people of the Hebrew Bible, the Israelites, and us are one and the same. That is us. Christians have a far more ambiguous and far more ambivalent attitude because Christians have a very strong sense of newness. That when Christ came into the world, there's a new revelation and something new, something dramatically new has happened. The relationship between God and humans the map has been redrawn. So there is, on the one sense, a sense of continuity, as the rabbis have, but at the same time, there's also a very strong sense of discontinuity, a very strong sense that we are new. We are not the same as those people we read about in the Hebrew Scriptures. We are a new people altogether. The end result of that process is to emphasize the newness of Christianity and to emphasize the newness of the New Testament. And the phrase New Testament, of course, ultimately comes out of Jeremiah 31. Right, in which Jeremiah is prophesying a future time when there will be a new covenant between God and his people. Now, what exactly Jeremiah meant, we can argue, but certainly Christians understood this to mean that there will come a new covenant that will supersede, that will replace the old covenant. You can see that in the passage of the epistle to the Hebrews, which is on your handout, chapter 8, which quotes Jeremiah 31, and then adds this sentence. In speaking of a new covenant, he meaning the prophet, treats the first as obsolete, but what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. This is what's called the doctrine of supersessionism, right, in which Christianity will supersede, literally take the place of Judaism. This is a very strong sense of newness, or a departure, which the rabbis, as far as I know, don't have. The rabbis never once stop and look and say, my God, we've written a brand new Torah. Look at the Mishnah. It's chock full of stuff that's nowhere found anywhere in the Torah. Moses is ready to come back and sit in the rabbinic academy without understand what the hell we're talking about. Occasionally they admit that, but most of the time they live in denial. No, this is what Moses meant all along. We're the same thing. Whereas Christians, perhaps a little historically more self-aware, Christians are saying that was then and this is now. The result is that Jews, when they read the Hebrew Bible, are convinced that the people in the Hebrew Bible are Jews. When Christians read the Hebrew Bible, they are convinced people in the Hebrew Bible are Israelites. Not exactly us Christians, sometimes us Christians and sometimes not. Okay, everybody, time's up for today. Hope to see you on Friday.
Okay. Stop share. Oh, and Mary has joined us. Okay, people are unmuting. Very good. Anything surprising that you heard?
I was just a little surprised, I don't know, surprised, but something I had never thought about was that Paul had never met Jesus.
Yeah, I guess Paul would now, I guess it depends on how you define met. Paul would argue that he met Jesus, it was just post-crucifixion. Because, Paul, the road to Damascus thing,
Right.
Paul was not part of, Jesus's posse when Jesus was alive, though. I think that's what is meant there.
Didn't he
unlike the-
start out at trying to arrest the followers of Christ? They were
Yep.
Christians.
Correct.
I mean, he was on the other side.
Yeah, that's the story of when, Paul has his call on the road to Damascus, and then Ananias comes into the story as he's going to take care of him, and he gets his call, and the messenger says, "You need to go take care of Paul," and he says, "Saul," and he says, "You're out of your mind." You know what he's been doing.
Yeah, they're afraid of it.
So that's an interesting double call story there, as far as, but you're right. He was not. I guess there's some you could argue maybe Paul did maybe see Jesus while he was alive. They kind of arguably were in the same place at the same time.
Yeah, they never
Uh,
mentioned
there's-
whether Paul heard him in the temple. or
Yeah,
anything.
there's no evidence that happened, and Paul never. If it had happened, I think Paul would have said something, because he was kind of touchy about the fact that that the other disciples sort of looked down on him because he had not been with Jesus when Jesus was in his earthly ministry, and so he goes to great lengths to talk about how he was sort of a late bloomer disciple, that Jesus appeared to after the crucifixion.
Yeah.
So,
He kind of skirted around the issue, and I'm sure that was a wise thing to do. That the disciples they don't know who wrote the Gospels, but there's some thoughts, and maybe I'm assuming that they had some influence on what was written, at least Mark. I mean, I don't know who actually wrote it down or formulated it orally, but he seemed to indicate that the disciples, and maybe I misinterpreted, that they had nothing to do with the disciples were physically separated from the Gospels.
you want to help me here, Mary? I think
Yeah, yeah,
Go ahead.
I hear what you're saying, Penny. And the modern Bible scholar would say yes.
Okay.
But say yes to what?
That the modern Bible scholar would say that the 12 disciples were not the people who wrote the scripture.
However, my thinking, I would agree with what you just said, Mary, but clearly the apostles must have been telling the stories over and over about Jesus and their experience of Jesus, and those stories got handed down, and certain ones sort of rose to the top, like the Synoptic Gospels, where they're, hand in glove. They're pretty much a consistent telling of the stories. So
And
there
the
is a
gospel,
continuity. I think there is a continuity with the
Yeah.
original 12 apostles, but they didn't write anything down.
Yeah, and we don't know. And all we have are the earliest records that are available. So there's a guess
Right,
as
we
to
don't know if
what
they-
happened between like 30 AD and 70 AD. We don't know. But I agree with Carl that they were probably putting out the Gospels constantly wherever they went, and somebody was writing it down, or somewhere it was getting recorded orally. That at some point they decided, we have certain records now, but
I always thought that Mark was the most seems to read like an oral, writing down of an oral history.
Mhm.
And the other gospels said, okay, that's fine, but there's a lot that's left out. So we're going to write a bigger version and pull in stuff from the Old Testament as, they were talking about, the birth stories and all of this. But
Mm.
Mark was like, okay, this is what Jesus said,
Mhm.
you know, beginning, middle, end, nothing, no um alliteration, you know, embellishments. And of course, John is poetry. I mean, that really went, that wasn't meant to be, you know, an historic account or anything. He really said, really, this is really what it's all about, but it's much more it's poetry, theology, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I'd say theology. Poetry, yes, but theology, yes.
Certainly, yeah.
But the style, the way some of them are written too, sound like somebody who was an eyewitness or interviews somebody who was an eyewitness. You know, talk to them. I don't know.
Mark, certainly.
I think, you know, I mean, my own, I'm inclined to agree with Carol. I mean, the Gospels though are different, have different thrusts and have different styles.
Yeah.
Then they have different audiences, and I suspect maybe reflect different schools. I mean, I think what we see that they report in Acts is there are divisions among the disciples pretty early on. So you may be seeing that in the sort of different thrusts of the different Gospels. Like Matthew is much more, people argue Matthew is more Jewish than Luke. You know,
Luke is Greek.
well, they were all Greek, but Luke was aimed to a Gentile audience versus Matthew, which was aimed to a Jewish audience.
Yes.
Is at least what I understand. But the one of my, and I can't answer the question. I've always been curious is, you know, to what extent, if at all, were the Gospels influenced at all by Paul's writings? Since Paul's letters were, you know, pre-exist the Gospels. So if they were around, you know, where do we see the Paul's influence in the Gospels? And I've never heard an answer to that question.
No. Good question.
So
The whole issue of us Christians reading all these references to Jesus into the Old Testament. I can understand why Professor Cohen feels that way. And, but no, I find that so meaningful myself.
yeah, well,
Like Jeremiah talking about the new covenant and Isaiah's servant songs and so forth. And I'm thinking, well, I can understand why Jews would think we're bending over backwards to see these relationships. And maybe we do take it too far. I don't know.
well, I mean, I agree with you, Carol. I mean, for one thing, I think the beauty of the poetry in, say, in Isaiah and the servant songs, I think is really is striking. I don't know if I mean, did Isaiah have Jesus, and whichever one you want to pick? Did any of the Isaiahs have Jesus specifically in mind when they wrote it? I doubt it. But does that mean if it's inspired, maybe the inspiration, you know, maybe it was inspired into it? I don't know. That's a way to do things, but so I think and we will learn in the subsequent, actually what he talks about 23, that's the course we're doing, and we'll learn in that there are a number of things where you know, the rabbis, and he said as much, the rabbis really stretch things too. For instance, in the prohibition and having dairy and meat together is based on there's a prohibition, I think in Leviticus, it says you shall not eat a calf boiled in its mother's milk. I don't know of many people that have wanted to do that, but they got to that basically because they say it 3 times. So that must mean we can't have dairy with meat. So that's why you can't have a cheeseburger. So, I mean, Cohen will talk about that. So there are some, if the Christians make leaps, and he mentioned that even in the lecture, the rabbis make some pretty wild leaps too. So,
And then there's places too there where it talks about how Jesus explained things to the disciples. So but it's not illuminated as to, I mean, some of the parables, yeah, but what else did he explain? Did he explain connections with Isaiah? We don't know what those details are.
yeah.
That may
Well,
be
there is his first sermon, or I don't know if you call it sermon, when he read in the synagogue, set the prisoners free. Help me, Mary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. It's Isaiah. And Jesus reads it in the synagogue and then says, today this has been fulfilled,
yeah,
referring to himself,
yeah.
Right.
fulfilling the freedom for the blind and the lame and the
Yeah.
way.
So,
So yeah, and it's and of course a modern Bible scholar looking at that would say that somebody was putting those words in Jesus' mouth to make it all go together.
Yeah.
But for me, I mean, I appreciate what modern Bible scholars do, but I don't read it that way. I read it as Jesus said it, that's where I come down on that one. And that's what I do for most of them, as I say, well, but for me, the truth is that Jesus was that who said, who fulfilled Isaiah.
Yeah.
For me, that's what works.
Yeah. Why else would they run him out of the synagogue and chase him? I mean, he had to say something to have that situation. Happen.
Well, a big, well, I wouldn't say no. Jesus knew the Bible. He breathed it and spoke it. So, he's the one that's got to have made some connection with the disciples and anybody who listened to him. Even though that connection now has gotten maybe lost or kind of filtered, but obviously he was quote unquote a modern scholar at the time. He knew the scriptures.
And he did call himself many times the Son of Man.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say that's
So
one of the consistent things he said. I think across all Gospels was, he was the Son of Man multiple times, and that now you can argue about what that meant. But then again, and with what Penny said, he was talking to an audience that had an understanding, at least in their minds, of what it meant. Go ahead, Dave.
With the Samaritan woman at the well too, she said, are you greater than Jacob who gave us this well? And she said, could you be the Messiah? And he says, I am he, or something like that, something to that effect. And so, I mean, he referenced himself, Carol, I think in a lot of places.
I'm thinking about the people who actually wrote the Gospels. When they were telling, for example, the story of Jesus' passion, they were reminded of what had been said in the Old Testament, in Isaiah, for example. And they reflected on what had happened to Jesus, and they said, oh, these details were present in what happened to Jesus. So let's emphasize them. Let's make sure to include those details that show his relationship to the prophecies in Isaiah.
Well, I think one of their struggles was that until then, there was never their understanding of the Messiah was that the Messiah there was never any understanding that the Messiah would be crucified. And so once, that's what they call the scandal of the cross. How did they deal with that? How do you deal with the Messiah that's been crucified? And so then they go back into the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, and then they can find parts that you mentioned where it almost comes up like a job description.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, in the Gospels, Jesus says as much.
Yeah.
The one thing that was nice that I find very satisfying about the TV show, The Chosen, the disciples they're confused, up, down, and sideways. They're not getting it. And Jesus is telling him over and over again, what the message, and, it's filtering through at the end a little bit, but I can imagine when the whole thing more or less blew up in their face with the crucifixion, they really had to struggle, had to really struggle with it.
Yeah. And we'll talk about it more in the second piece here, but that's a struggle that was reflected on the other side. And that's why the date 70 is so important, because once the temple is destroyed, the Israelites, Jews are struggling the same way, because they had a temple focused religion, and with the temple gone, what does it mean to be a Jew? Now the Christians, in struggling after the crucifixion, they came up with an answer that you don't need the temple because Christ is the temple. You don't need all these sacrifices because Christ is the sacrifice.
Mhm.
Yeah, because you can worship God anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we should stay tuned to the next one, huh?
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay.
Well, I think everybody, actually, after having done this, and when we finish, I think having done this, I think you will really enjoy the second part, because we're going to get into a lot of why, for instance, the food laws and then the Sabbath. And he'll talk about, the common roots, or, is there some similar roots between the Passover and and Easter?
Yeah.
Sort of those things. So I think that will be really quite interesting for everybody.
Yeah. I was thinking back to the beginning too. I wasn't familiar with really these other documents he talked about, letter of Barnabas and Justin Martyr and stuff.
Justin Martyr, I will be sending to you. I don't know that he mentions Barnabas, but yeah, there are. Well, see, now the Epistle of Barnabas falls within. There are a bunch of non-canonical Christian writings, and that's one of them. It's like the Gospel, Thomas Gospel, the Judas Gospel, the Mary Gospel, and all those. So they're out there. So that falls in that category. And then you have Justin Martyr, and he's sort of later, and he's more in the league with the church fathers like Augustine, and so there's other people. So, but.
I'm gonna say goodnight. See you next Monday.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
Happy
Good night.
birthday to Ray.
Happy birthday, Ray.
Yeah, happy birthday, Ray.
Right.
Oh, I'm in here.
Yeah, he's listening. He's
I
listening.
get-
He
He
stays off
appreciated.
camera.
Yeah, yes. Well, I guess
I'm here.
he's in his easy chair.
Remember, the 70's the new 40.
Yeah, I like that.
He appreciated your comments, Carol, of
Oh.
what we were or were not eating for our birthday dinner.
All right.
It was healthy.
They had a picture of the birthday dinner that they had, and Penny had this little something on her plate along with a tomato from their garden.
It was
And then
shrimp.
down
It was a
the
shrimp dinner. Yeah.
And down at the end of the table, I don't know what Ray was eating, but there was a lot more of it. I'll say that much.
Oh, what did
Well, it
you
was
get?
his birthday. It was his birthday, so
He got to choose.
Calories don't count on your birthday. Nothing counts on your birthday.
What did Ray choose?
what What
I
did it-
don't remember. It was good. Oh, no, it was stuff this, stuff that.
It was stuffed flounder.
Flounder, shrimp, it
Stuffed
was a
flounder.
combination.
And
Oh,
I
okay.
got shrimp scampi.
Oh,
We
So I
ran
didn't, I
into-
didn't starve.
We ran into a woman in the park today, wanted to know where she gets nice fish down at McCook's. And we said, well, you go north on 161.
Yeah.
I don't know if she ever made it.
Yeah,
There's
Um,
nothing really downtown, so.
not yet anyway. We're hoping to get another fish market, but yeah, she had a fairly heavy, I think it was
German.
German accent. So she's looking for fish. And I'm saying, well, there's fish in the water,
yeah.
or you can drive to Flanders.
Yeah, go to Flanders.
Which is
So-
already-
So Flanders wins.
That was our
Okay.
birthday celebration.
Okay, well,
Say
Well,
hi to
I wrapped it.
Suzanne, David, for me.
What's, oh, yeah, oh, okay.
good night.
Okay.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.